Hey, it's Max McAllister from Traction Dynamics back, and I guess we'll call this loose steering crown part 2. So we had a video there a little while ago. We were trying to find the source of, why this guy's handlebars had come loose and were rattling. We knew it was something related to the top clamp. In another video several weeks ago, we showed you where we had found, we're going to call them the main steering bearings. The main steering bearings on the, we're going to call it still a fork up front, had come loose. The races were improperly seated at the factory. The whole operation loosened up and we were able to inspect it. Everything was fine. We put it back together. No damage, no harm, just some time. This is a different bike on a different day. This guy had had his bike in his pickup truck and drove down from Maryland. When he got here, his handlebars were rattling on the bike. So I'm going to say this 1,000 times. It's not from putting your bike in your truck or your trailer, right? That nut was loose and it was going to come loose. This bike has 200 miles. So this nut was not torqued properly. So here's the steering crown nut. This is analogous to what you have on any old motorcycle in the world. What's different about this bike, it took us a couple hours to figure out and get through all of this to learn. First of all, if you need to take this loose, because of the tie rod system, you can't pull it up over this spindle. We're going to call it the steering shaft, okay? So that's easy to get around. I suggest dropping the left rear tie rod. It's the one that floats. Remember we showed you in the rubber isolator. You can kind of see it here. That floats in the rubber isolator. That one's just, to me, easiest. So tighten it, let it just dangle down, or loosen it, let it dangle down. You'll need to take this bolt out of the handlebar, loosen this one, roll the handlebar up a little bit and retighten it just so you can get a tool down. This is blocking access to the nut. You need a 14mm wrench to get the tie rod loose. And I think I showed you the other day, we use just a short, good old-fashioned Honda toolkit wrench, or you can buy something at the hardware store and grind it pretty flat. Put a little grease on either side of it so it slides up into the rubber boot, because the rubber boot will want to grip it, so that'll go up in there. When you tighten it, it's important that when you put it back together, it's important to note that once it's tight, you're going to feel it just keeps turning, and you're going to think, what is wrong? But I wanted to show you that you're actually turning. This is all tight. What you're turning is that rubber isolator bushing that the whole thing floats in. So when it's tight, it's tight. Give up. Don't keep wailing on it. You're not going to change anything. And it's going to feel like it's loose. But what you're doing is you're twisting the shaft in the rubber. So don't do that. You don't want to tear it up. All right? Put the handlebar back. Anyway, so drop the tie rod, and then you can lift the whole crown and handlebars off. And it exposes what looks like a traditional... you can pan up to me. So it exposes what it kind of looks like a traditional steering stem poking through with a normal set of Honda steering bearing adjusting crown nuts there, castle nuts there. So with a traditional tabbed lock washer that secures the two, everything you've seen before in the past. What's new and improved that you will be surprised is because there's no lower triple clamp that spindle is attached to, it just turns forever, 360 degrees. So we wanted to check those bearings and make sure they were properly adjusted while we had it apart, having found the crown nut loose. And so we couldn't figure out how we were going to do that. And but it turns out that that spindle is like a giant bolt. So there is a bolt head underneath up in the frame. Now, in the Honda service manual, you believe it or not, the way they show it is everything you see has to come off the bike. And I mean everything. All of the fairing gauges, instruments, electronics, the whole entire front suspension and everything to get to that bearing in there. Now, so we looked at it. That's not absolutely necessary. If you follow the method I showed you to get the front shock out, you could remove the front shock and you should be able to get up in there. We haven't done it, but I've put my fingers on it. So if the front shock is out of the bike, you could then get to that nut, and you're gonna need to, get to that nut and have a second person hold it in some way, and that's the next trick. We haven't done that, but hold it and then have a person on top torque the crown nut. Set the bearings and torque the crown nut. The other thing we found was the lock nut on the locking castle nut. It's on top of the castle nut that sets the torque on the bearing in the spindle is Loctited from the factory. It is on there, so that was an issue. Never seen that before, but I guess they figure this is never coming apart. This will never take any impact or any beating ever in its entire life. Normally, the whole fork and front suspension is transferring all kinds of load and shocks and jars into the bearings, and the tongue twisted there. And so that's why your steering bearings wear and loosen up over time. This bearing will never loosen up or never wear out, and I think Honda just Loctited it for that reason. It's never going to do anything but this. The most pressure it's ever going to have is when you pull the brakes and push on the bars. That's it, or if you accelerate really hard, which is nothing. Now having said that, what do you do if you happen to find your crown nut loose? Here was the trick. So we went to tighten the crown nut, and the problem is when we go to torque it, the first impression was that the nut was stripping because we were trying to tighten it and it wouldn't tighten. So after it took some figuring, it will be obvious when I tell it to you, otherwise you wouldn't get this. But the entire assembly is spinning because there's nothing to stop it. Once we figured that out, we thought, well, we'll use the steering lock to hold it. But unfortunately, the steering lock is a pin that goes up into the upper triple clamp, and it doesn't have anything to do with the spindle. So once you have the upper triple clamp off, the spindle just spins. So in the end, to save this guy so he could get it back, we tightened it as much as it would go by hand. This is what you'd have to do if you were not able to, we're going to call it correctly, torque this crown nut. You'll see what we did here if you want to come closer. We got it as tight as it will go with a common 1/2-inch drive ratchet in the hand. And then we just put some marks, and we took a 1/2-inch drive air gun, 30mm socket, and then we just bumped it. We watched the marks move, and basically arrived, wait till the marks wanted to stop moving. So basically they had zeroed, and they weren't going to want to move anymore without really forcing the gun, so to speak. So this is it's a very crude way of torquing it, but the option is 8 hours of labor and not being able to drive your bike. So this guy wants to be able to drive his bike. Now he can. So if you're ever traveling on the road, there is a way, if this ever happened to you and you got somewhere, your handlebars are rattling and your crown nuts come loose, it is no harder than you would have to remove your tank shelter and this instrument cluster here, which is just 2 bolts in this, and then you will have the little decorative cover with 2 little screws, and now you're looking right at the crown nut. And so just know when you try and tighten it, you're going to go, oh no, I'm stripping it. But you're not. The spindle is just spinning, and so then you'll have to take a air gun, put it on there, and just bump it. Don't go, don't try to damage it. You just want to bump it, bump, 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 until the thing seats and is as tight as it's going to get. So now look, this bike is fixed. Nothing wrong with it. We may kind of take up a thing where we check this for people. We'll kind of consider that going in the future. While we have their front shock out, it might be something we'll add a little, courtesy check or a little cost of the labor or something. But it's hundreds and hundreds of dollars of labor to remove the front shock. And but arguably this is a warranty issue. So that's the other thing. If yours comes loose, you can go to your Honda dealer. If you're on vacation and want to ride your bike, this is going to be, I'm showing you a shortcut so you can continue on with your vacation. Or if your Honda dealer says it's going to be 3 weeks before they can get to it, who knows what. Or, we need to get the warranty rep out here to inspect this. You don't want to go through all that. You can just tighten the nut. So anyway, all fixed. Happy customer's going to be stoked. The suspension's in, and we should have this back together shortly, and we'll we'll get a look at our first test ride on a tour. I'm a standard. We haven't got to ride a standard yet around here, so this will be cool. Thanks a lot. Smack signing out.